August 21st, 2025, 6:14 a.m. The calm waters of the South China Sea were shattered by chaos. A Chinese warship, prowling in the haze, suddenly veered hard to port, its bow slicing dangerously close to the American destroyer USS John S. McCain.
You have illegally entered the total waters of Huangyan Island of the People's Republic of China without the permission or approval of the government of People's Republic of China.
On the American decks, sailors braced for impact, alarms screamed, and for one chilling second, the world teetered on the edge of catastrophe. No shots were fired, no hulls collided, but the provocation was a spark thrown into a powder keg. Within hours, the order came down from Washington. President Donald J. Trump, furious at the reckless maneuver, commanded a full naval alert across the Pacific Fleet. Every carrier group, every submarine, every destroyer brought to immediate readiness.
The fact of the matter is, the 21st century is becoming the age of the Navy.
This was no longer a routine patrol. This was a signal, a clash of power, pride, and law that could decide the future of the world's oceans.
For centuries, oceans have dictated geopolitics, but after a period of relative calm, the world has once again entered a period of prolonged conflict. And oceans are back at the heart of these conflicts.
So what really happened that morning? And why did one order from the White House send shockwaves across every naval command in Asia? Let's find out.
It's because China is working on a secret new technology for its warship. That's right. And the details of this new technology are so chilling, it's bound to spook the US.
At dawn, the USS John S. McCain cut silently through the disputed waters near Mischief Reef. It was a freedom of navigation patrol, routine on paper, anything but routine in reality. For Washington, the patrol was a signal to allies like the Philippines, Japan, and Vietnam that the United States would not abandon them in the face of creeping control. But for Beijing, the American destroyer was a challenge that could not go unanswered. Chinese commanders saw the patrol not as a legal mission, but as an intrusion. Their intent was simple: to intimidate, to shadow, to remind the region that China's will, not international rulings, dictates the rules in the South China Sea. So when Higgins cut a steady course near disputed reefs, Beijing responded with steel, sending warships to swarm, to menace, and to try to force America into retreat. But the US has never taken orders from other countries, and with the might of its navy at the forefront, it wasn't about to start now. It began suddenly. From the gray horizon, shadows emerged. The sharp silhouettes of Chinese Type 052D destroyers and 054A frigates moved with predatory precision, their bows slicing the waves as they closed in. One by one, they fell into formation, riding parallel to the American warship at less than 500 yards. Together, they displaced over 12,000 tons of steel and firepower, outnumbering the lone US destroyer 3-1. One Chinese captain gave the order. Engines thundered, and the first warship swung into a parallel track, now at 400 yards off the McCain's beam. A second vessel closed in tighter, narrowing the gap to 350 yards. At sea, those distances are measured not in miles, but in heartbeats. Over the bridge, radios came the sharp, commanding voice of a Chinese captain.
U.S. Navy Warship 76. This is Chinese Navy Warship 573.
The order came next.
Your behavior has posed threat to the safety of Huangyan Island. Alter course and leave immediately.
The response from the McCain was calm, measured, and deliberate. This is international waters. We will maintain course. But Beijing was not bluffing. The Chinese captains pressed harder, cutting across Higgins' bow at less than 400 yards. The violent wake slammed into Higgins' hull, shuttering the steel beneath sailors' boots. Engines roared. Radar arrays spun. Alarms shrieked through the passageways. One frigate passed so close that radar operators reported a collision risk if the American ship deviated by even 5 degrees.
Beyond the lawful 12 nautical miles. In this area, international law guarantees all missions of high seas navigation, overflight, other lawful courses of the sea. Any attempt to limit freedom of navigation is overflight.
The stakes were terrifyingly clear. On board the McCain, an arsenal waited in silence. 96 vertical launch cells, each capable of carrying Tomahawk cruise missiles with a 1,000-mile reach, SM-2 interceptors for high-altitude threats, or Harpoon anti-ship missiles designed to break hulls wide open. Its SPY-1D radar array swept the horizon, tracking over 200 contacts at once with unblinking precision. Close in, the ship's phalanx CIWS could unleash a storm of 20mm rounds, 45,000 bullets per minute. One order, one push of a button, and the McCain could reduce the waters around Scarborough Shoal to a graveyard of twisted wreckage. But China had not come unarmed. The Type 052D destroyer carried its own lethal loadout, the feared YJ-18 anti-ship missiles. The Type 054A frigate added HQ-16 surface-to-air systems and torpedoes designed to complicate any American strike. Beyond them, smaller militia vessels and Coast Guard cutters lurked like sharks, ready to swarm in numbers and clog the seas with chaos. In mere seconds, the Chinese warships began veering dangerously across the McCain's bow, kicking up violent wakes meant to push the destroyer off course. Each maneuver brought steel within seconds of collision. A collision at that speed could tear open hulls, ignite fuel, and send hundreds of men into the sea within minutes. Every man on the bridge knew it. The two sides were less than one decision, one slip, 1 second away from unleashing enough firepower to start a war. Engines roared, metal groaned, and for a heartbeat it seemed inevitable. Two giants of steel colliding in open water. For the sailors, this showdown is the equivalent of standing in front of a loaded cannon, waiting to see if the enemy would pull the trigger. And with every pass, the margin for disaster shrank. The silence on the bridge grew heavier, and the question became inescapable. Would this be the moment steel met steel, and silence gave way to fire?
For centuries, oceans have dictated geopolitics, but after a period of relative calm, the world has once again entered a period of prolonged conflict. And oceans are back at the heart of these conflicts.
Whatever China's reason for challenging the U.S. is irrelevant, because they soon found out why the U.S. is the undisputed champion of the blue waters. The USS John S. McCain is no fragile target. Beneath its steel decks lay the firepower of a small fleet. At over 9,000 tons displacement, the destroyer carried an arsenal that could alter the balance of an entire battle group. Every Chinese ship in the area was already tagged, its course, speed, and weapon signatures cataloged with clinical precision. Overhead, drones and satellites fed constant updates into the destroyer's combat information center, turning the ship into a floating fortress of data. And yet, none of it was armed. Not a missile was raised, not a gun barrel turned. On the bridge, the air was heavy with tension. Sailors stood rigid, gripping steel railings as the Chinese warships prowled closer, their wakes slapping violently against the hull. The ship's engines hummed at a steady 20 knots, refusing to yield, refusing to break formation. The orders from the American captain were simple and brutal in their restraint. Maintain course, maintain speed, do not engage. The silence was suffocating. The destroyer's crew had spent years training to react in seconds. Now, their orders demanded the opposite: to endure humiliation, to stare down threats without flinching, to show strength not by firing, but by refusing to be provoked. This is like having a weapon of mass destruction, holding it at point-blank range, and forcing yourself not to pull the trigger. The McCain carried the power to wipe out its tormentors in less than 15 minutes. But to unleash that power here, in these disputed waters, would mean more than sinking a few warships. And so, the crew stood steady, jaws clenched, eyes fixed on glowing radar screens, waiting and watching. But even discipline has its limits. And in Washington, the man in the Oval Office was about to make a decision that would change the standoff completely.
The war for global domination between the US and China in the Pacific. Today, in the age of a growing global war, a country's naval might is everything.
Hours after the near collision, the decision came down from Washington. President Donald J. Trump issued the order for a full naval alert. In an instant, the Pacific lit up like a war map. Every U.S. carrier strike group received new coordinates. USS Ronald Reagan repositioned from Yokosuka. USS Theodore Roosevelt steamed out of Guam at full speed. Across the ocean, Los Angeles-class attack submarines surfaced only long enough to receive orders, then vanished back into the deep, their movements silent and lethal. In air bases from Okinawa to Hawaii, fighter squadrons armed live ordnance, pilots strapped in, cockpits sealed, and runways thundered with the roar of afterburners. Satellites tracked Chinese movements in real time, while intelligence analysts traced red lines across digital maps, marking potential collision points where fleets could meet. This was no longer a single destroyer holding steady under pressure. It was the mobilization of an empire's arsenal, a message broadcast to Beijing in steel and firepower. The United States would not be shoved aside, but with every carrier that shifted course, every submarine that crept closer to Chinese waters, the danger multiplied. Because this was no drill, this was no exercise. One wrong move, one spark, and the Pacific could become the epicenter of a war between superpowers. While the McCain locked horns with Chinese warships, another clash erupted just miles away. At Scarborough Shoal, a Chinese Navy destroyer and a China Coast Guard cutter collided, outmaneuvered by a much smaller Philippine patrol vessel.
Chinese Navy ship has collided with its own Coast Guard vessel while chasing a Philippine patrol boat in the South China Sea. Philippines Coast Guard reported it was escorting boats distributing aid near the contested Scarborough Shoal when the incident occurred. Footage released by Manila shows the collision, leaving the smaller Chinese boat severely damaged. Beijing confirmed a confrontation had taken place, but did not actually mention that collision.
The forecastle of the Coast Guard cutter was crushed, its steel torn open. By dawn, search and rescue boats combed the waters, suggesting sailors had been thrown overboard by the impact. The image was humiliating for Beijing. Mighty warships undone by a smaller ally's defiance. Analysts say this surge in reckless Chinese maneuvers is not random, it is desperation. An embarrassed regime projecting power, grasping at control through intimidation. For Manila, this is no abstract chess match. In 2023, the Second Thomas Shoal became a flashpoint where Chinese ships rammed and water-cannoned Philippine supply boats, trying to reach the grounded BRP Sierra Madre. The clashes left several Filipinos injured, one losing a finger. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. warned that while the June 17, 2024 incident was not enough to invoke the U.S.-Philippines Defense Treaty, the death of a Filipino sailor would cross a red line. The message was clear. One casualty could drag America into open conflict, and Washington has signaled it is ready. More recently, Trump's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth oversaw the arrival of a NMESIS ship-killing system in the Philippines' northern islands, just over 100 miles from Taiwan. These moves are firepower placed on Beijing's doorstep, a direct counter to Chinese militarization of artificial islands in the South China Sea. Beijing calls these deployments destabilizing, but to America and its allies, they are lifelines, a reminder that if Filipino fishermen or patrols are attacked, they will not stand alone. And yet, each collision, each water cannon strike, each reckless maneuver pushes the region closer to the abyss. The U.S.-China standoff is no longer confined to destroyers and frigates. It now threatens the lives of civilians, fishermen, and sailors caught between giants. The question isn't if another clash will occur, but whether the next spark ends a life and forces the world's two greatest powers past the point of no return. Every year, over $3.5 trillion in goods moves through the South China Sea. That is nearly 1/3 of global commerce. Whoever controls these waters controls the lifeline of the global economy, and Beijing knows it. By turning reefs into fortresses and harassing civilian fishermen, China is not just enforcing maritime claims. It is rehearsing the ability to dictate the flow of global trade. The power to delay, divert, or choke shipments is the power to bend nations without firing a shot. But China's not just building naval bases on artificial islands. It's also working on a secret new technology set to rival that of the United States Navy, the most powerful navy in the world.
It's because China is working on a secret new technology for its warship. That's right. And the details of this new technology are so chilling, it's bound to spook the U.S.
For the United States, the stakes are not measured only in steel and missiles. They are measured in credibility. If the Philippines, a treaty ally, is left exposed to ramming and water cannons, what faith can Japan or Taiwan place in America's promises? If international law is mocked without consequence, what happens to every alliance built on Washington's word? That is why Trump's order for a full naval alert is more than military posturing. It's political theater with global consequences. To his supporters, it projects strength, a president refusing to let America be humiliated, a commander who draws hard lines where others hesitated. To his critics, it is reckless brinkmanship, an escalation that risks turning a maritime standoff into a regional war. Strength, deterrence, credibility, all of it now hangs over the same waters where wooden fishing boats flee steel warships and where the future of the global economy rides on each close call. President Trump's full naval alert has redrawn the board, but with Beijing doubling down, the question is no longer if the clash will happen, it's when. And when that moment arrives, the South China Sea won't just decide who controls a few reefs, it will decide who controls the future of the world's oceans. If you want to know what happens when the first shot is fired, stay with us, because when the fuse is lit, there will be no turning back.